Hello, my friends, and happy Fat Tuesday. Happy Mardi Gras. Let the good times roll. Sanctuary Kitchen, take two. We are so excited to invite you here tonight. And like I said, we're going to do things a little bit differently. I'm kicking it right over to our chef, Ken. Take it away.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Sanctuary Kitchen for this very special episode in celebration of Mardi Gras. We can actually trace the roots of Mardi Gras back about 2,000 years when the first Christian leaders decided to give their new converts one day to feast and indulge themselves before they enforced on them 6 weeks of absolute abstinence and sobriety called Lent. On this day now, and the days leading up to it, celebrations of Mardi Gras, may include elaborate parades and crowning royal courts and costume balls. And in the South, especially feasts that are designed to enjoy all the wonderful foods that we think of as part of the Creole and Cajun cuisines. As the Cajuns say, laissez-le-bon temps rouler. Let the good times roll. And that's what brings us to the Sanctuary Kitchen tonight. So I grew up in southern Mississippi, just across the Mississippi River from New Orleans. And I have always been really fascinated with this really unique cultures and cuisines that are Creole and Cajun. These and to understand them, to understand their culture and this wonderful food we're going to be talking about, we have to do just a brief little history lesson, which I think is really interesting. So in the early 1600s, France decided to colonize Northern America by sending a lot of French citizens over to establish settlements along the St. Lawrence River in Nova Scotia. They renamed that area Acadia, and they named themselves Acadians. But about 100 years later, Great Britain regained control of Nova Scotia from France, and they kicked all those French people out. A lot of them went back to France, but for reasons that are still being debated, a lot of those French-speaking Acadian people migrated south, and they literally went from northern Canada to southern Louisiana. But when they got to southern Louisiana, the Creole culture had already been flourishing there for over 200 years. This Creole culture had its own food, it had its own music, it had its own religion, it had its own cultures, and it was this amazing blend of people who came from 4 different places. They came from North Africa, they came up out of the Caribbean islands, they were Native Americans, primarily Choctaw peoples, and they were Spaniards who came into southern Louisiana through Mexico. And so that already amazingly diverse culture had to all of a sudden start trying to assimilate French culture into itself. Those French immigrants, when they got to Louisiana, they called themselves Acadians. But the Creole people were the first ones to adapt that word and to call them Cajuns. And so the Creole people and the Cajun people have lived together side by side now for almost 300 years. And their cultures and their cuisines have overlapped some, they have blended some, but they have also been able to maintain real uniqueness from each of their different backgrounds and customs and cultures. For example, if we asked a Cajun and a Creole person today, what is the difference between your two cuisines? They would say tomatoes. And the reason is because tomatoes are almost always included in Creole cooking, and they are almost always not included in Cajun cooking. So let's get busy in this kitchen and find out what all this fuss about Creole and Cajun food is all about. Joby?
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. And I'm going to just pop right back over here to our normal slides and welcome everyone. Once again, most of you know that we love seeing your faces. So thank you for everybody having your cameras on tonight. And if you want to go ahead, last time the chat box was quite vibrant. Let's just put it that way. Okay, Kevin and Kristen, you two stay apart and at least 1 foot apart, and enjoy tonight. So here we go. Again, if you like a text feature, if you want a reminder that it's Sanctuary Kitchen or whatever else we're doing that night, you can toss your cell phone number in the chat. You can also reach us at our Facebook page, Sanctuary in the Woods. We also link our recording links up there. And if we have your email address, I hope we have everyone's here, 2 things happen. We'll send you an email probably Sunday, once a week. And on that email, after Sanctuary Kitchen, will be 3 fabulous recipes for tonight. So if we don't have your email or you're not sure, now is the time to put that baby in the chat box. Okay, and we appreciate that. I do want to let you know once again, for those of you that were able to join us a couple weeks ago for Your Voice Matters and really helping us decide what you enjoyed about some of the programs we've had over the last year and a half and what you'd like to see us do in the future. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And also tonight, we're doing things a little bit different. So if you came to last month's Sanctuary Kitchen and this month's Sanctuary Kitchen, we're looking for feedback to make sure we're hitting this exactly, the programming and the template exactly as you want it. So we're open to feedback on that as we develop this show that will be a periodic show. All right. And then finally, we really want you to block off time in your calendars for Lent and invite anyone who'd like to come. Last year during Lent, we did a taste of CLM and we took 4 sessions, modified them for online, and they were honestly the hit of our year. They actually were relatively the hit of the entirety of Sanctuary Online thus far. So this year, we're taking a piece of a previous section of CLM and calling it Saints Are People the Light Shines Through. It's one of our favorite courses in the entire curriculum, and we're developing it out over the entirety of March. You'll have homework. You're gonna meet some saints of our lives. You're gonna meet saints in your own lives. You're gonna realize that you indeed are a saint to other people. And then we're finishing up with our Seder dinner, a virtual Seder during Holy Week. So we invite you to all of that. And again, bring a friend or 3. Finally, just to let you know, in March 22nd, since Codebreaker was quite a heavy read, we went ahead with something really fun. And this month we're reading or listening to Tina Fey's Bossy Pants. Real light reading, and people actually said if you have Audible, it's much more fun to listen to this book, you know, from Tina Fey. So happy about all that. And Ken, oh, I gotta show one thing. Kristen, you were jealous about us eating dinner last night. Look at how beautiful our table setting looked. I know, when you live with a set decorator. So Ken, it is back to you. My friends, again, just to remind you, we've got 6 or 7 video segments tonight, and we'll stop each of those and allow for some conversation and some Q&A. If you tee up your questions in the chat box, that really helps me manage our clock tonight so we can get to the State of the Union, if you care to watch that. All right, Ken, back to you. Actually, Barb, I think we're going to you, right? Tee up that
absolutely. Can you stop sharing your screen and I'll tee us up.
All yours.
All right.
This is so good tonight, my friend. Ken, thank you so much for doing this. It was beautiful and delicious.
So the dish that you most wanted us to cook for Mardi Gras is jambalaya. So I'm going to be, first of all, preparing a classic chicken and sausage jambalaya. Then I'm going to make my favorite, which is seafood gumbo. And then we're going to have a little surprise for you at the end. But first of all, jambalaya. Jambalaya is more associated with Creole cuisine than with Cajun cuisine for two obvious reasons. First of all, it involves tomatoes. And second, remember we talked about that Spanish influence that was a part of Creole culture and cuisine even before the Cajuns got there. Well, that's really evident when we start making jambalaya, especially if you're familiar with Spanish paella, because unlike most Cajun dishes, the rice is actually cooked in the dish with the protein of the dish. In the case of jambalaya, that can be chicken, it can be sausage, or it can be seafood or any combination of those things. So remember, we always begin by assembling and measuring the ingredients that we're going to use in any kind of dish like this. It not only makes cooking more efficient, it just makes it more fun. You don't end up having to try to run and find something and maybe even finding out you don't have it. And so by assembling everything before we begin, it just makes it easier for us as we cook. So for our jambalaya today, first of all, I have several tablespoons of canola oil in this little cruet, and I'm going to add some of that to our pot right here as we begin. And then in this really big bowl, I have 2 pounds of boneless, skinless chicken thighs cut into bite-sized pieces, and I also have a pound of our Cajun andouille sausage, and I'll explain in just a minute why they're together and why they're in that big bowl. And then our wonderful Trinity. This is the basis for almost all of the best Creole and Cajun dishes. It's always a combination of 3 things: onions, celery, and bell pepper. And for this particular recipe, we need 2 cups of chopped onions, 1.5 cups of chopped bell pepper, and 1 cup of chopped celery. This is called a Holy Trinity when Cajun foods. And then I have a heaping tablespoon of a really good Creole seasoning. We can talk more about that in just a minute. And to it, I've also added 1 teaspoon of dried oregano and 1 teaspoon of dried thyme. And then in this little dish, I have 3 minced garlic cloves and a couple of bay leaves. And then I have 3 cups of chicken stock. I have 28 ounces of fire-smoked, roasted, diced tomatoes. And I also have 2 cups of our rice. We're going to use an uncooked, long-grain white rice in our jambalaya. Now, as we begin, the first thing we're going to want to do is to saute our meats. That's our chicken thighs and our andouille sausage. And I want to first of all season it a little bit with a good Creole seasoning. So I'm just going to put a little Creole seasoning in there on top of those. And then we're going to mix them up a little bit. Any kind of meat particularly is better if it's browned before you use it in any other way. And so for our jambalaya, we're going to just dump it right into our pot here. See that sizzle? Now that's going to need to brown for probably about 10 to 15 minutes over medium-high heat. We want it to cook slowly. We don't want it to burn, but we want to get a little browning on the sausage and on the chicken. Those flavors just begin to pop there. So we're going to let that brown here for just a few minutes, and then we'll be right back.
Ken, there are questions about how you got those beads, which we don't have time for, I'm sure. It's been asked if you would show us your boobs or your bobs. We prefer your boobs probably. And then there's actually a decent question somewhere along here. There was, please God, about what is Creole spice? When you said, I want to put some Creole spice in there, what was that? Can you show us maybe?
We'll talk about that in the next segment.
Oh, you tease. Okay. And And the rice is regular rice, right, Darcel? Whatever that
It's
means.
just plain white long grain rice.
Haha, long grain, Darcel. Okay. All right. Any questions yet? Again, tonight we're doing jambalaya and gumbo. So we have one more video as Ken finishes the jambalaya. Any questions about that yet? If not,
Just one question real quick. The size of your sausage and your chicken pieces, as far as when you were cutting them
just-
up, bite size?
Yes, bite size. Yeah, just slicing the sausage into bite size and then just kind of chopping the boneless, skinless chicken thighs into bite-sized pieces.
Okay, thank you.
bet we'd be able to show you, but we ate them all. It was so good. It was so good. Oh, thanks for that question. Hey, Barb, why don't you pop up the second thing and we'll watch Ken finish the jambalaya.
Back, and we have browned our chicken and our sausage and have removed them to a bowl to set them aside for just a minute. Now I'm going to put our pot back on. It's got some wonderful little brownies in the bottom of it, you know, where we've been browning these vegetables. And the next thing we're going to do is to add to that our wonderful Trinity. So here comes the Holy Trinity, our onions and our celery and our bell pepper. And we're going to want them to cook just for a few minutes in that wonderful oil that's been left over from sauteing our meats. They're beginning to sizzle in there. I'm going to turn that up just a little bit. These don't have to cook completely because the entire dish is going to simmer for a while once we get all of the ingredients in there. To that, we're going to add our Creole Seasoning, and to that, of course, we've added a little bit, 1 teaspoon each of dried oregano and dried thyme. We're also going to add to this our garlic and bay. Bay is one of the herbs that is used a tremendous amount in Creole and Cajun cooking. It's kind of underestimated, but it really does add a wonderful kind of earthy, dusky taste to these kinds of dishes. So now we're going to just let those things simmer for a couple of minutes. We want to just let our onions begin to wilt a little bit, become a little bit transparent. You don't necessarily want them to brown up. We're kind of using the Asian method here. You know, people say Asians cook vegetables best because they don't actually cook them, they just threaten them. And so we're threatening our onions and our bell pepper and our celery here for a couple of minutes, along with the garlic and that wonderful Creole seasoning. I mentioned Creole seasoning several times, and of course you can buy it in all kinds of different, from all kinds of different manufacturers. I particularly like Tony Chicheri's Creole seasoning. He makes 2 different kinds. One is an original and the other is a bold. This is the bold. It just has a little bit more of a kick to it, and I use it most of the time. And then there are all kinds of other brands. This is Jeffrey Michael's, which is also good. This is just called a Louisiana Cajun seasoning. Cajun and Creole seasonings are just indistinguishable from each other. Anything you buy that is one of these major brands, particularly Tony Chicheri or Zatarain's. Zatarain's is the other one, that all of the products that they make that are associated with Cajun and Creole cooking are really, really good. You can depend on them. I also was talking earlier about adding our andouille sausage, which is a smoked Cajun pork sausage. It's available almost anywhere now, but any kind of good smoked sausage would do in a recipe like this. We like the andouille because it has a lot of the Cajun seasonings in it. There's another sausage that is made down in southern Louisiana called boudin, and boudin in France is actually a blood sausage. When it's made in Cajun and Creole cuisines in southern Louisiana, Sometimes it is a blood sausage. Most of the time it's a sausage that's made with a blend of pork and beef, and it always has rice in it. And so that's why we particularly prefer the all meat pork andouille sausage for most of our Creole and Cajun dishes. If it calls for andouille, or if it calls for just a smoked sausage, any good smoked pork sausage, you know, will be really, really good. Now, to this, we're going to add our rice. Here comes that Spanish pay influence. We're going to add the rice right in there with our Trinity and the garlic and the other things. Mix that up good. And you can actually, when the rice begins to heat, it gives off a wonderful fragrance. You can actually smell rice when it begins to heat up. So we're going to keep stirring that. That's a wonderful blend now of our rice and our vegetables. They have quite a bit of that good brown that from the bottom of our pan is mixing in with all of that. I can smell the rice already. And so the next thing we're going to do is add our remaining ingredients. We're going to add 3 cups of chicken stock. The last time we were together, I gave you the recipe for the way we make our own vegetable broth here in the Sanctuary Kitchen. We also make our own chicken stock. Maybe we'll talk about that sometime, because when you make your own homemade broths or stocks, they're just so much better than anything you can buy in a store. And always remember, if you're making a dish that includes rice or pastas of any kind in the dish itself, always have more of your liquid on hand, because in my experience, you almost always have to add a little bit. So I have more of our homemade chicken stock over here, just in case I might need it. And then I'm going to add our fire roasted tomatoes along with their juice. And now we have all of our ingredients in the pot together. And what we're going to do is just let this simmer for about 20 minutes. This recipe is going to make about 8 really nice big helpings of jambalaya. And so I like to use a big enough pot. I always like to use a pot bigger than what I actually need. It's just so much easier cooking. So I'm going to cover this. I'm going to let it simmer for about 20 minutes so that the rice soaks up all of those juices from the tomatoes and from the cooking of the meats. And as soon as that rice becomes tender, then everything else in there is about ready to go. So after about 20 minutes, our jambalaya is going to be done and ready to eat. During that time, I'm going to place our setup to get ready to make our seafood gumbo. So don't go away. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Ken. I know you're there somewhere. So let me again, the chat box, Ken, I wish you could listen, but it's silly. We've had quite a few people asking, how much does this make? And did you just say 8 servings? Okay, that's 8 cowboy servings, people. I mean,
that particular recipe makes 8 servings. They're big servings. That's assuming that that would be a meal for a person, maybe with a salad and bread, you know, and so it makes 8 servings, but they're 8 big servings.
Yeah, cowboy size, folks. I mean, cowboy,
yeah.
Like big cowboy, Texas cowboy servings. I'm just saying. Wow. Anyway, Ken, you mentioned bay. As people are asking, bay leaves, a certain bay that you can remember with water with Tom when you were vacationing, dried ground bay. What kind of bay are you actually talking about?
Yes, bay leaves are dried leaves from the laurel tree. And you can buy them, you know, in just about any spice section of any supermarket. Just look for bay leaves. They're whole leaves. They are dried, but they are the leaves of the laurel tree.
And I'm very excited right now. But from Darcel, do you add any hot sauce, Ken?
Yes. Yes, we're going to talk about that when we get to gumbo.
Yeah, we have loads of hot sauce. Okay, now, Jane Ann, you just won. Barbara, are you laughing? I'd love you to be on screen right now. Jane Ann, you you just won the like a car if we could give it to you, but we're not going to. But you'd win like a car and a vacation that we're not going to give to you. You just won everything. Did you guys see the question she put in the chat? Jane Ann, what did you say? Unmute, honey. You're muted. I'm going to do it for you. Did the meat get put back in the pot? So we had finally our first blooper. Ken,
yes,
Ken,
yes. The minute when we were taping that, the minute the camera went off, I said to Barb, I got so excited about that jambalaya, I forgot to put the meat in. So we put it in immediately. So yes, it simmered for the 20 minutes that it was supposed to all simmer together.
I just didn't see you do it, and I'm
nobody
thinking,
would
oh, maybe
catch
it goes in later,
no,
but
doing
20
that.
minutes is a long time.
Oh, fabulous, Jane Ann. We were hoping, we weren't sure. And it's funny because we played the replay. You can play it yourself shortly and catch it. What was gorgeous, Jane Ann, was because Ken put one of his 4,000 bowls that he's using in front of that bowl, you couldn't actually see that the meat was still in it. So Barbara, like, I don't think they'll notice. Maybe they'll notice. Maybe they won't notice. If they notice, they get a prize. Okay. Look in.
Thank you.
Keep looking in your mail, Jane Ann. Nothing's coming. Okay, so my friends, this the jambalaya, initially the ingredients simmering, and then in the real world, if Ken actually had put all that gorgeous chicken and sausage in the jambalaya, it'd look like that. What you can't see quite accurately is the rice is still starting to puff up. So in that photograph on the right-hand side, the finished jambalaya is a little bit less soupy and a little bit more thick, right? Because that rice just soaks all that flavor up, and it is stunning. So any questions before we head to gumbo? Let's see. Anything at all? 1001, 1002, Barb? Tee that one up, baby. We are moving on to gumbo, because why have just one dish when you can have two or three?
Welcome back. So our jambalaya is done, and now it's gumbo time. Jambalaya and gumbo are very distinctly different from each other, both in the way they are prepared and in the result that we get. We've talked a little bit about how these two cuisines have merged and overlapped some over the last 200 years, and yet been able to maintain some of their own distinct qualities. We talked about the fact that jambalaya is much more clearly a Creole kind of dish, while gumbo is almost the perfect combination of these two different cuisines. For example, the word gumbo is a North African word which means okra. And any purist, and I'm one, will tell you that if gumbo doesn't have okra in it, it's just not gumbo. At the end of before we serve our gumbo, we sprinkle it with sassafras filet. And that is a contribution directly from the Choctaw Native American people. But the really distinctive feature for good gumbo is right here. It is a roux. And this roux of those French-speaking Acadians who became Cajuns. A roux is made of only two different ingredients, some kind of fat and an equal amount of flour. Now, if you were down on the bayou 100 years ago, that fat would probably have been lard or maybe butter. We make it a little healthier here. I've made this roux with 2 cups of canola oil and an equal amount, 2 cups of flour. And there are different ways to make roux. Some people will just mix their fat and flour together, put it in the oven at 100 degrees for 6 or 7 hours. I prefer to make mine on top of the stove. It's a little more labor intensive, but it takes a lot less time, and you get to really control it a lot better. So this particular roux, I just moved it off of the eye. I have been cooking it and stirring it for about 40 minutes. It took that to get to this kind of dark color that we love, because any good gumbo is going to begin with a really good dark roux. Now, when I make gumbo, I make this big old pot full of it for a couple of reasons. One is that it's not a cheap dish to make, especially these days. You know, really good seafood is pretty expensive, and when you see everything we're going to put in here, you know, you'll understand. So the more we make of it at one time, the cheaper individual servings of it become, because secondly, it freezes really well. So when you make a big pot of this, which I make maybe 2 or 3 times a year, we can share it with family and friends. Then we put it into containers or maybe into freezer bags, and then you have gumbo, you know, that you can eat for like 2 or 3 months after that. It freezes for that amount of time really, really well. So let's look at the other ingredients that we're going to add to our gumbo. First of all, I have 3 pounds of really beautiful big shrimp. These are shrimp that have already been deveined and shelled. And then I have 1 pound of fresh, never frozen, fresh lump crab meat. And then I have 2 pounds of these Pontchartrain, Lake Pontchartrain blue crabs. Lake Pontchartrain is actually a big estuary just north of New Orleans. It's huge. It covers about 650 square miles, and it's famous for 2 things. First of all, the Pontchartrain Causeway is the longest continuous bridge over water in the world. And the second thing it's famous for are these beautiful blue Pontchartrain crabs. Now, this is the way they come to us. The crab is already cleaned, but it's still kind of whole. So let me show you what we're going to do to clean them to end up with little crab bodies like this, which are just full of the sweetest kind of meat you can imagine. And then the claws, which are larger, but they also have these tiny little fin things on them. And we're just going to use some kitchen snips, and we're going to just take those little things off because they don't really have enough meat in them to make a lot of difference. If you were going to make like if you wanted to make like a crab broth, you might want to include them in it. But we're just going to take them off and discard them for our purposes. But these big crab claws, we're going to save them because they are full of really, really delicious meat. So we're just going to get rid of those little guys. We're going to keep the crab body, which is just full of meat. Sometimes, if this cooks long enough, this body will almost come soft enough that you can just eat the whole thing. But what we traditionally do in the South is we just pick the meat out of it or suck the meat out of it. And once it's cooked with all these magnificent flavors, there's just nothing like it. Then we all end up with these big claws. And what I usually do is just take some kind of mallet and just give them a little snap like that. It just breaks the shell enough for the wonderful seasonings and liquids that we're going to put in there to cook through all of that meat. And then we're just going to dump all of these beautiful little crab bodies and claws into our gumbo at one time. And then I have 2 pints of fresh oysters. Now, everybody doesn't like oysters, and so this is kind of optional. If you don't want to put oysters in your gumbo, you don't have to. But I love them, and if you don't like them, you can just eat the gumbo, you know, and push the oysters to the side. Then I have 2 pounds of really beautiful white boneless fish meat that we're going to add there. That's just almost going to cook down into a kind of liquid. Then we have our vegetables for this dish. Seafood gumbo does not use the whole Trinity. You kind of have to apologize for this after you talk as much as I have about the Trinity, because in seafood gumbo, we only use onions and celery. This particular recipe calls for 2.5 cups of celery and 2 cups of onion. We don't use bell pepper because most Cajun recipes that involve seafood don't use bell pepper. If the recipe is going to be chicken or sausage, then it probably will use the whole Trinity. But this, what we have in here is onions and celery and green onions, which also, of course, add a beautiful little extra taste. And then we have our Creole seasoning that we use in our jambalaya, and then okra. As I said, if it doesn't have okra, it's not gumbo. What I have here is a lot of chopped okra. We probably wouldn't use all of this, you know, right at first. And we have the okra that is cut into small pieces. And then I have a number of different small tender pods of all this okra came from our garden last year. I picked it and froze it just for purposes like this. And so we have our okra, and then finally we have 4 big cloves of garlic that have been chopped. Now, once we finish our gumbo, as I said, we're going to serve it with some sassafras filet, which we'll talk about in just a minute, sprinkled over it. We're going to serve it with Louisiana hot sauce, which a lot of people like. We're going to serve it with chopped green onions, and we always serve it with rice. But we put as opposed to the way we made our jambalaya, we're going to actually put our gumbo over our rice. So here's how we're going to start. We're going to start by moving.
We're pausing this video. Last time we had a really long video. And so although Ken is continuing to cook, we're pausing here. So we have time for some questions. And you do have a few in the chat, Ken. Let's see, there was quite a lot of conversation about the seafood, mostly from me. And about the crabs. Did you get the crabs at HEB, Ken?
I actually got these crabs at Walmart.
Wow. Okay. So
Yes,
does that
and
answer,
these are, as I said, these are, you'll find them labeled as blue Pontchartrain crabs. In the South, they're so good in gumbo that they're just called gumbo crabs. If you go to Louisiana and just ask for gumbo crabs, this is what you'll get.
For those of you who do not live in Texas, HEB is a grocery store that Texans are absolutely in love with. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's an inappropriate relationship, and everyone in Texas loves HEB. Can I get a amen? All you Texans, right?
Amen.
Amen. It is the silliest thing I've ever seen, but I've moved and lived in a lot of places. And these people love that friggin' store. So thank you, Bud, for that. But head over to Walmart, my friend. Also, there's another question, Ken. Okra. Do you have to use okra from our garden, or can you use canned okra?
No, I don't think there's any such thing as canned okra, but there is frozen okra. You can buy okra either cut into small pieces, or you can buy whole pods of okra. Okra is one of the vegetables that loves heat. And so after our gardens begin to kind of burn out, like in July or in August, we can still plant okra, because okra, the hotter it gets, the better okra likes it, you know. And so we grow a lot of okra here and freeze a lot of okra and then use it to cook throughout the winter.
Thank you, sir. And if you don't have your chat box open and you can't read the competition between Kevin and Kristen to find all the ingredients on Amazon and then ship you the links, you're missing something. Okay, so I'm just saying, if you haven't got that chat box open, there's lots of links that these two are planning in there. So we do have sassafras and we do have the filet, right? So far on Amazon. Okay, God bless.
So sassafras is expensive, $69 for, was it 4 ounces, Kristen?
Yeah, but I think that was like some kind of organic special stuff. Because then when I put in sassafras filet, I got something that looked more like a kitchen spice. So maybe Ken, you can speak to it. Is it the filet?
This is the Zatarain brand of filet, and this bottle was $3.
Do you use Gumbo File at all?
What?
Gumbo File.
Filet also, I think it's filet, Kevin.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's what this is. Gumbo filet. This is gumbo filet.
Gumbo filet and sassafras is the same thing?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Filet is ground sassafras leaves. I'm going to explain that in the next segment.
Oh my God, I have sassafras. For forever, I thought I just had gumbo filet.
Can you hold that up really close to the, take it all the way to your camera? I've got you pinned so they can see it large, a little higher. Perfect. Got that one, folks? All right. Can you see it, bud?
It's definitely available on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon.
All right.
Another question, sorry, do you prep the okra in any way to get rid of the gooiness, or do you rely on the gooiness to add to the thickening?
No, yeah, no, you depend on the gooiness as a thickener.
Okay.
In gumbo, okra serves two purposes. One is the flavor, which is wonderful, and the other is that the okra actually becomes a thickener.
Yep. And as Cheryl's saying, not pickled okra, people. This is a gumbo, for God's
No,
sake. Okay?
no,
Not
no,
pickled
no.
okra. Thank you, Cheryl, for that detail.
A lot of times the when you freeze veggies, they will not thaw out well. So the okra does thaw out so that you can cut it into the chunks that you need, the slices.
Yes.
Thanks, Yvette.
Yes, if you just, okra is one vegetable, which if you can either freeze the whole pod or you can cut it, into slices. If you fast freeze it, if you just cut it and then just put it in a bag and put it in your freezer, then it's fine to use to cook with.
Okay.
So Yvette, you're saying though, if you actually freeze the whole pod and let it thaw, it thaws well enough that you can make a good cut in it as well.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, you can. Yes.
Perfect. All right, Barb, let's let him finish this stuff. I want to see the rest of this gumbo because, my friends, there's enough gumbo here to feed all of us. I mean, you all could have been at dinner last night and tonight. We made a pile of that stuff. So
That's not very hospitable.
I know, sorry. It's a hell of a long drive for you, Kevin.
Yeah.
And you need to learn to say filet, not file. Okay?
Apparently.
Roux into this big pot. It's going to take me just a second to get all of that out of there. Again, the secret of every gumbo is a really good, dark, rich roux. Now, to that roux, we're going to add our vegetables. First of all, our onions and celery. And in just a couple of seconds, they'll start sizzling there. We want to cook them just long enough for them to get a little bit tender in that roux. So we have a mixture here of our flour, our oil, our onions, and our celery. And we're going to let those cook there for just a second. I talked a little bit about okra earlier. Okra is actually a vegetable very familiar to Southerners. I found out is not necessarily that familiar to Northerners, but it's a vegetable that African Americans brought over from Africa. And it is used in gumbo both as a thickener and for the flavor of it. It's a really delicious vegetable. And in the South, we fry okra, we throw whole okra pods into pots of beans and peas, and it is always present. That's sizzling up really nicely. And it's always present in gumbo, both as a particular flavor. Filet is literally the ground-eyed leaves of the sassafras plant. Sassafras grows wild all over the South, and Native Americans used it both as a thickener, but especially as a flavor to gumbo. And it's also believed to have real medicinal purposes. Until I was 7 years old, I grew up in a big old farmhouse We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. The house was heated with fireplaces, and we had an outhouse, of course. And in the winter, my mother or my grandmother would bring a big frame and put it in front of the big fireplace in the living room, hang a quilt over it. And then they would make a tea out of the roots of the sassafras plant, and they would put a pot of sassafras tea and a little cup down on the hearth where it would stay warm. And if you had to get up and go to the outhouse during the night, there was a ritual that you had to follow. First of all, you would pour and drink a swig of the sassafras tea, then you'd wrap yourself in that big warm blanket, then you'd go to the outhouse, and when you came back, you'd put the blanket up for the next person, you'd take another swig of sassafras tea, and then go back to bed. And that was supposed to keep us really, really healthy. And who knows, it probably did, because most of those remedies actually work. But filet gumbo, or gumbo filet, is just the ground up leaves of the sassafras plant, and it is the contribution of the Choctaw people who used it. We talked about our Creole and Cajun seasonings last time, but we're going to use this particular same bold one when we are making our gumbo. And then I also have here about 4 nice big cloves of garlic. Now our vegetables are simmering, they have softened, this is wonderful. And so now what we're going to do is add to them our garlic. And I'm going to fill this big pot now about 2/3 or maybe 3/4 full of hot water. This is really important. When you add any liquid to your roux, it has to be, it doesn't have to be boiling hot, but it can't be cold. If you add cold to a hot roux, you will break your roux. And what that means is that your starch and your fat will separate, and then you just have this big muddy mess. And so what I'm going to do now is step a little bit out of our picture here, and I'm going to bring some warm water around and add to our pot. Now we're going to stir that good. Let me get that out. That already smells amazing. And the last thing we're going to do here for the next little while is seasoning. We're going to use our Creole seasoning, and you just have to season to taste with this kind of thing. With a pot this big, you know, I'm going to probably start off here with about 2 or 3 tablespoons of this seasoning. We'll definitely check our seasoning later, you know, to be sure that it's really good. But now we want this just to simmer uncovered for about an hour until our vegetables are really tender, because, you know, seafood doesn't take long to cook at all. So just wait for us. We'll be back in a few minutes to add all the rest of our ingredients and finish our seasoning.
Good conversation about okra, my friends. That's important. And then, Ken, did you mention how much water you actually poured in? Again, warm water, so you didn't break the roux?
For the recipe that we send out to people, I think calls for 2 gallons of water. And because that pot is so big, obviously you don't have to make as much gumbo as I make, you know, at the time. This recipe can easily be halved or quartered, you know, or eighth or whatever you want to do. But because I make so much at a time, I use about 2 gallons of water.
Yeah, and Kevin, exactly right. Ken says it freezes well. And I'll tell you, we ate it last night, and it was, you know, and then we ate it again tonight. And the pot looks like it looks like the Volkswagen commercial when people come out and they keep coming out. Like, as much as you scoop, it still stays there. So we have loads. Barb you can 32 the recipe, 132, and you'll still have enough to feed a small town. So yeah, you need an outside freezer, Kristen, the kind you can put bodies in. That's the kind of freezer a town can have. Yeah, so. All right. Well, anybody want to see him finish this up?
Yeah.
Finish.
Yeah, Ken, thank you. And also just make sure you know, a little thanks to Tom for all the background decor. Tom did an amazing job pulling out loads of decorations and making our set look very seasonal and festive. And Kevin, we're not gonna talk about bodies. Okay. All right.
Did you
Ken,
take pictures of a plate? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jane Ann, you can ask a question.
Oh, no, did you take pictures of your plates when you had scooped it onto a plate, like, or into a beautiful bowl went to eat at portions? And did you eat them together or separately?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And one, we didn't take pictures, and we're learning. That was our biggest lesson this time. We have to take more stills.
Yeah.
And we'll show you a picture of the finished gumbo in just a minute after
Okay.
this video. But yeah, that's a great idea, Jane Ann. Also, like, plated as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're learning and learning. That's a really good piece of feedback. Thank you. All right, Barb, go ahead, my friend, and hit play.
Now for about an hour, and it's time to start adding our seafood. So the first thing we're going to do is add our shrimp. Remember, we have 3 pounds of beautiful big shrimp that has already been peeled and deveined. We're going to add our fish, 2 pounds of any kind of really good white, boneless, skinless fish. Of course, in the South, we just can't do any better than catfish. And so what I've added here is 2 pounds of beautiful farm-raised catfish. If this were the summer, we'd be catching the catfish out of our pond and using it. But in this case, we had to buy it. And then we're going to add some of our okra. As I told you, this is like the one component that determines whether it's really gumbo or not. We don't have to add all of this now. As the pot decreases, we'll be adding some more okra as we go along. And we're going to turn that up a little bit and let that really begin to simmer with those things inside it. Gumbo occupies a really unique place in the history of cuisine because almost every one of the major cuisines around the world features some dish which began as a peasant dish, began as a sustenance for the poorest people, and yet somehow it has risen to the point of being a delicacy, and gumbo has that position in the Cajun Creole world. We said earlier, that you start gumbo just with a roux, which is made of fat and flour. So think about living on one of the bayous in southern Louisiana 100 years ago. You always had access to fat. It was usually lard. It was usually rendered pig fat, sometimes butter maybe. You could always get flour. You could always you could always raise some onions and some peppers. And so just think about a person, first of all, starting off by creating that roux and then adding some water to it. And then you have these wonderful spices that came up out of the Caribbean. They were already present there and coming from North Africa and from Spain through Mexico. So you began to spice that pot up a little bit. I can barely remember when I was a child visiting home sites down in southern Louisiana where they had what was called a Gumbo Shack. And the Gumbo Shack was actually a little structure out behind the house, usually, that had no sides to it. It was open on the sides. It had a roof on it. And then in the middle, underneath that roof, there would be a black iron pot about this big, suspended over an open fire. And that was the gumbo pot. And people could, back in the earliest days, you made your roux, you filled it up with water, you put some spices in there, then you caught a catfish, you cleaned it and threw it in. Maybe you killed a rabbit or a squirrel, maybe you got a guinea gumbo was big. in Louisiana. Just about anything could be put into that pot. And in some instances, the pot could keep going for weeks at a time because it was just renewable with all of those resources that were cheap. Actually, most of them were free, and they were very accessible to people. Now, of course, you go into the best restaurants in New Orleans, you'll pay $40 for the best bowl of seafood gumbo. So gumbo holds that unique place that a number of other, like for example, in Italian cuisine, pasta holds that unique place because pasta is made just of water and starch. And then somebody said, let's add some olive oil, let's add some tomatoes, let's add some anchovies. You know, and you end up with these magnificent pasta dishes. Even in the Japanese cuisine, sushi occupies that place. You know, we go catch a fish and we're sitting out on the beach and we don't have any way to cook it. Let's eat it raw. You know, and now you go into sushi restaurants and those are delicacies. And so gumbo began 200 years ago along the bayous of Louisiana by people being so ingenious and so creative by creating these dishes that tasted so good, but they were made primarily just of the few things that they had the most access to at the time. So we've added now our fish and our shrimp and our okra, and we've let that cook in here for just a few minutes. And now it's time to add our oysters. First of all, our crab. I'm going to add this crab. Remember, this is lump crab meat, just pure, wonderful crab meat. That crab and fish are actually going to almost cook down into a liquid themselves, which just makes the gumbo broth so delicious, especially over rice. Then we're going to add all of our little, remember little crab bodies that we talked about before? We have 2 pounds of those. We're just going to dump them. Crabs, shells, everything just go right into the gumbo. That gives the gumbo that wonderful kind of southern texture where people are used to cooking everything together at the same time. And then finally, we're going to add our oysters. And as I said before, you know, oysters are questionable for some people, but I really love them. I think they're a wonderful addition to gumbo. So now look at that. Here is our gumbo, and all of our ingredients are in there. And this pot is absolutely full. And so now what we're going to do is just let this simmer for a little while so that all those flavors really begin to blend together. And then I want to invite you to join us as we really celebrate Mardi Gras by finishing out our Mardi Gras meal with a couple of surprises that I promised you. And I think I may even have some Mardi Gras revelers joining me here for dinner this evening. So thank you for being with me for this, and we'll be back to celebrate Mardi Gras soon.
I'm going to flip right up here to a slide. Jane Ann asked for the view here. So this is that roux, and I think Bud, you may have asked if it's a dark or light. This is a dark roux, right, Ken? That would you could consider that a dark roux?
Yes, that's considered a dark roux. When you make roux for vegetable casseroles, you want a light roux, but a roux for gumbo, we call this like shoe leather roux. Some people like it even darker than this, but I think this is about the right color for gumbo.
Then you saw Ken put that in the big pot. We're talking big pot. And then this is him adding a liquid. So this is what it looks like kind of mid-stage there. And drum roll, please. Somebody, Cheryl, drum roll. Thank you, Kristen. Okay. That is what it looks like last night for dinner and tonight for dinner. And I think we froze up a bunch of it, right, Ken? Because we still had 2 big bucketfuls of the stuff. Just amazing, just truly amazing. Any questions? I'll stop that share, but there's a nice, so is that helpful, Jane Ann, what it looks like? Yeah. But I love the idea of plating one final plate and taking a picture of that. I think that's fantastic.
Especially because you had a gorgeous table. So if you just took
Yes.
just even 2 or 3 plates by the table decor would be perfect.
Next time. And we do have a surprise. We'll unveil what our next meal is, won't we, Cheryl? Here pretty quickly. Darcel, you are getting ahead of yourself, girlfriend. Just hold on 1 second. I'm not sure if many of you watched, what's that show called? Is it Sunday Morning America, CBS Sunday Morning? They had a phenomenal last week. Yeah, but did you see that? They had a phenomenal like a piece on king cake and on just the history again, as Ken's given us so much in story tonight about the Cajun and Creole people. Also, there was a phenomenal piece. So if you want to catch that as well on all the stories about king cake. Let's see. I think I need an invite before making this. Okay, bud? And Kevin will pick you up on his way down from Toronto. Not a problem at all, Niagara area. Oh.
Come on the way, Kevin.
You better get a van, Kevin, because you might be picking up Yvette too on the side. Go through Michigan, grab Cynthia. Yeah, I got you.
Sounds like I gotta go about 5 days in advance, because if I have to go that far east and then come back that far west again, I'm doing the 50 states.
And it'll be worth it, my friend. It was so good, so good. Well, let's close this up. We've got one more short video as we display the finale. Go ahead, Barb, if you want to tee that last. It's a shorter video, my friends. And again, if you have to jump off because you want to see the president walk through and get patted on the back and clapped at, thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. Our wonderful chicken and sausage jambalaya is ready. Our seafood gumbo is ready. We have lots of rice prepared for our gumbo. We have chopped green onions to garnish it with. We have wonderful sassafras filet, which we talked about earlier, to put onto our gumbo, and also Louisiana hot sauce if anybody wants that at the end. Now, I also promised you a kind of a surprise tonight, and here it is. This is Crawfish Cornbread. This wonderful little guy right here, the crawfish, is a wonderful protein source and an indispensable ingredient for all Cajun and Creole cooking. The state of Louisiana actually produces commercially over 100,000 pounds of crawfish meat every year. And you can find crawfish recipes not just for cornbread and other breads, but for all kinds of salads, crawfish soups and stews, crawfish étouffée. It really is a very important part of the staple diet. When I was just a kid, growing up in Mississippi, all of us had what we call little crawdad baskets. We call them crawdads. We had little wire baskets, and if we got ready to go fishing for big catfish, we would go down to the creek and we would catch like 25 or 30 crawdads. We'd put them in our baskets, and then we would go out to fish for these big catfish. If we happened to have a really bad day and not catch any catfish, then we came home and cooked our bait and ate it. It was a really pretty good system there. Taxonomically, crawdads are so close to lobsters that they really are actually little lobsters. In much of the country, that's what they're called. In many countries around the world, they're called little lobsters. So this is our Crawdad cornbread. It is chock full of onions and peppers and corn, and also with a pound of really succulent, sweet crawdad meat. So tonight we want you to join us in our Mardi Gras meal with our seafood gumbo, our jambalaya, our crawdad cornbread, and also our dessert. Our dessert is the classic Mardi Gras king cake. king cake has actually been a part of Roman Catholic celebrations of Mardi Gras for over 800 years. Those Acadians that we talked about brought it to North America about 500 years ago. And then when those Acadians moved to southern Louisiana and became Cajuns, they carried it with them then. Up until then, this cake would always have a bean hidden somewhere in it. And the person who got the bean was crowned as the king or the queen of that particular meal. When our friends, the Acadian Cajuns, moved to Louisiana, they replaced that bean with a little plastic figure of Jesus and put it somewhere in this cake, so that the person who gets the little piece of plastic Jesus in the cake is responsible for hosting next year's Mardi Gras party. Thank you so much for being with us through this celebration of Mardi Gras. Tonight around our table, we have Tom and Blake and Bill and Joe. We are missing Cheryl so much tonight. She's in San Antonio with her sister Kelly and brother-in-law Michael, who underwent some really serious surgery a couple of days ago, but he's doing really great. So we're sending them love and missing them tonight. So thank you. Have a wonderful Mardi Gras. Bon appetit. Buen provecho. And laissez le bon temps rouler. I'll see you next time in the Sanctuary Kitchen.
All right, unmute. Bye, bud.
Really does a great job.
That was awesome. Oh my goodness. That was
Oh, it's so much fun. I know many of you have to drop off. But before you go, I do want to say next month, Cheryl is going to be cooking. Yes. The first dish I ever ate at her mother's home, which we call chicken little for some reason. And it's a chicken and lemon and capers dish that is just a go-to. I mean, I don't even like chicken. I love this chicken dish. So Cheryl's going to be next up, and Barb's got a dish coming, and once it gets summertime, I'm going to be grilling, doing some specialties. So please help us to show this how you'd like us to show it, right? If you have any feedback, we are more than open.
I have one thing to add. When someone asked about the decorations,
Yes.
I'll never forget decorating for a medieval Christmas with Tom in charge and the rest of us lined up like he told us to. And the entire church was filled with decorations in the basement. We talked about the pig that they had in their bathtub, but we were hosting the host church and we put on but I guess someone asked about decorations, and all I can remember is all these scenes were set up, and all Tom Cole kept saying is, more garland, more lights, more garland, more lights. So all I can say to all of you is, more beads, more masks. You don't know how to decorate? More beads, more masks.
Never too many.
Never too many.
Yeah, you just are nailing it exactly. Man, I can't wait for a few of you who've never been on property here at Sanctuary. Tom has a business, Lone Star Props, where he has moved from being a set designer to someone who rents props out to movies and television shows and commercials, and 3 big barns full of props. So Cynthia, I'm betting a few of them got pulled out of there. But you know what?
There you go. But I'm saying to us amateurs, just more beads and more masks, and it enhances everything.
So I want to share something with you, Ken. Ken, this is a bit of a cheat. I don't know. I'm sure you all know New Orleans really well, and there's this great A&P grocery store that's right in the French Quarter that serves the community around there, and they carry something that I couldn't find in Canada. And I stayed in a house there, and I ended up buying this and making it there because the Canadian guy knows nothing about cooking that food until now. But I found this Cajun Land Jambalaya mix and Cajun Land Gumbo mix. And well, they got the rice mixed in with it already, but I guess that's cheating. But I bought this down there and I impressed everybody that all the other Canadians I was staying with, which probably didn't say much. But and then I found it online. I could order it up here because it's simple and easy to make. But I need to get rid of this now because now I know how to make the real stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's a website out of New Orleans called Cajun Grocer, just no s.com. And a friend of mine that lives in Montrose oftentimes orders things from there, like turducken and alligator bites and stuff like that. But it's CajunGrocer.com. And his mother and her siblings were all born in New Orleans.
Is that right? There, Eric, CajunGrocer.com.
Correct.
Yes.
I put it, yeah. Yep, gotcha. Oh, well, wasn't that fun, Ken? Did you enjoy that?
It was fun.
I loved it. Yeah, fun.
Well, like I said, my friends, thank you for showing up. We do believe that, Cynthia, we heard your voice the other night, and we're trying to make sure we do things not like any other cooking show. So little feedback, little story, little history lesson, and
That's
time
great.
for us to share our stories, right?
It
So
was great.
yeah, thank you. And I do want you to know, not every recipe we show is going to be quite as complicated or need as many bowls. Okay, so for those of us who are sometimes like mediocre cooker, but I can try that. We are very excited to bring more dishes to you. And for a while, we're probably going to do this once a month. And we also listen to you, Cynthia, not doing things too often. We want to get this down right. And then we'll offer it maybe once every 6 weeks or so. But we hope to get a following as loyal as Cheryl's book club is. You know, people who really love to eat, really love to cook. And Sanctuary, we are in the midst of actually creating a Sanctuary cookbook. So that's one of our projects for 2022. And I would bet most of the stuff you'll see on here, you're going to see in that cookbook. And we look forward to offering that to you. Cheryl, what do you think? Is it supposed to be by the end of the year we'll get that done?
Well, we still have to figure out if we can make all the decisions. If, depends on how long it takes you guys to finish making your decisions about the pictures and stuff.
It is not an efficient process. Anything that we do down. There are 5.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
We're getting there, but we all have our opinions, and when we love when we can fan those opinions and thoughts out to you, our community, and the feedback you give us is always so appreciated, so welcome, and we love y'all very, very much.
Would you like Sanctuary shortbread recipe for your cookbook?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
What's that?
We will be asking you for recipes as we move forward.
Well, Jane Ann only does 50,000 of those every Christmas, right, Jane Ann? So
I think that's perfect, Jane Ann. Yes, thank you.
yeah, yes.
Well, I'm very excited about the series on saints and who are saints and how we recognize saints. So I'm very excited about this future situation.
Yeah,
I mean, we
love
love the cooking and everything, and the reading of a book that's fun is great. But this series on saints is going to compare, I think, to leading a life that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. It's actually from, I think it's the 4th class in the first part of the curriculum, and it's just beautiful. We've worked it out. We've kind of expanded it, and I think you're gonna really enjoy it, Cynthia. So once again, and Kristen, we heard you loud and clear that you're maybe not a church person, but you're learning some stuff. We're gonna bring you some stuff in Lent, and it's yeah, we're incredibly excited about this series. So please bring a friend, whether they're a church person or not. Gonna find some value.
I'm gonna admit right now in front of everybody, I knew there was a baby in the king cake. I didn't know it was supposed to be the baby Jesus.
When you watch that 60-minute show, I watched that about it. Was it, or no, the morning show, whatever it was. When they talked about the king cake, they said that they didn't know if that was supposed to be the baby Jesus, or they said they think that it's possible that somebody just got a whole a special deal on all those little porcelain babies, and so they started throwing those in instead of
Yeah, so it depends on who you talk to. I mean, in the history, because it used to be a bean, right? And
Yeah,
then it became
yeah.
a porcelain little baby, and then it became plastic. And the deal now is whoever gets that bean, besides being or the baby, whoever is crowned king for that day, they also are supposed to get the cake next year. So
Right.
again, if you have the Sunday morning, I think it's called CBS Sunday Morning, but you can do an on demand. It's a really good show. And the gentleman that was being interviewed, he tasted 88 king cakes, different kinds of king cakes.
Wow.
It's like kimchi in the Korean culture, right? Every family has a different recipe, but they're all wonderful. He wrote a book called The Big Book of King Cakes. And I think the most impressive thing I heard, there's 2 brothers down there that have a bakery. They bake king cakes for 3 months. Maybe 50,000 go out a day. And they then go fishing for 9 months. They're done. That is their entire year's work just on king cakes, you know? So it was really, really interesting. And I hope you enjoy that. I hope we had enough story, personal story, history, education. That's what we're trying to do here at Sanctuary Online. We just love you all. And thank you so much for coming. We've got a show to watch here in America. And God bless y'all. Stay safe out there, right? Wash your hands.
Thank you.
Ask for
Bye.
donations.
Love you.
Thank you.
Thank
Love
you.
you.
Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you.
That was amazing.
Hi.